are here today for Figma Variables AMA. I'm very excited. If you've been kind of watching along this series, we've done three other AMA live streams so far. Ask Me Anything, just a really great opportunity to get our community together, ask questions that you might have that might be blocking you. Just a great chance to learn a little bit more. And we've had a lot of different folks on each one, which has been really awesome. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into things. And just making sure my screen's, folks can see my screen, right? Awesome. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into things. This session will be recorded. You'll be able to find it in a little bit on youtube.com/Figma Design. Since this is an AMA Ask Me Anything, we want to make sure that your questions are coming in, and especially that I'm seeing your questions so I can make sure that they are getting to the right folks. So make sure that you're using the Q&A button so that we can see those questions. In addition, feel free to keep chatting in the chat and make sure it's set to everybody so that we can keep those discussions going. But definitely questions, put them in the Q&A so we can sort through those easier. And then, as always, be kind. Figma Code of Conduct. You can find that on figma.com/code of conduct. Excellent. So, like I said, we've gone through 3 office hours already, and this is our variables AMA. Just to set the scene a little bit, what we're going to talk about today. So ask us about any questions, like something you might be wondering what nested instance variant binding even means. That is something that I would like to know. So I'm excited to learn that one today. Something about maybe how you apply Boolean variables. Anything that's stumping you with variables, this is the time for it. We want to hear what questions that you have. Now, on the other hand, what we won't be able to cover today. I know there was a bajillion questions that came in about typography in our social where we asked what questions do you have. Today, unfortunately, we won't have time to talk about typography variables and roadmap questions, but we do have a blog post that we're going to post in the chat right now and a Help Center article for you that's really going to give you some information kind of around typography stuff and kind of why it's been a little bit more difficult than we might have thought to create that. We're also not going to talk about prototyping with variables, but we did just have an AMA on prototyping, and we'll share the link for that as well. That should be on YouTube already, I believe. So check that out if you're looking specifically on prototyping with variables, or yeah, prototyping with variables. And then non-variables questions, we'll also give some resources on that, on just kind of like getting started in Figma. But today, focusing on variables. Awesome. So let us get it started with just kind of introducing yourselves. Let me know what you do at Figma and where, and I think you already said where you're located, but just tell us again. So we'll start with you, Louis.
Hello, everybody. My name is Louis, and I'm a designer advocate at Figma, and this is my job. And where am I located? I'm in your Figma files, looking at your variables, roasting them. Over to Shayna.
Hi, everyone. I'm Shayna. I'm a product designer here at Figma, and I work on our design systems features. So yes, that does include variables. I'm in San Francisco, but I'm, I guess, also located in Figma, designing Figma most of the time. I'll pass it to Chad.
Thanks. Hello, everyone. My name is Chad Bergman. I'm also a designer advocate here at Figma. That means that I work with all of you out in the community. So I'm dialing in today from Phoenix, Arizona area. And yeah, just like Louis and Shayna and Lauren and all of us here, we all are also in Figma, designing Figma, playing with Figma, doing awesome. All things Figma in Figma.
All things Figma in Figma. Love it. Cool. Okay, so we've got a ton of questions coming in already, which is amazing. We've got a ton of questions that came in from our social, from customers that we work with a lot, just like some standard questions that we get that we wanted to go over for y'all. And we wanted to start out, we want to assume that nobody knows anything about variables. It's still a little bit newer. It only came out this June, and it is a fairly complicated thing. So we don't want to assume that anybody knows what they are, and we want to start with the basics. And for that question, I'm going to throw it over to you, Chad. Can you just tell what are variables? Why am I here today? What are variables?
Absolutely. And great question. And, you know, I have a couple little slides here just to really, for folks, if they're screenshotting or just want a simplified answer for what that is. You know, variables, the way to think about them is they're reusable definitions, kind of like styles. If you're familiar with using styles in Figma today, variables are similar in a way. You can still assign them to different design attributes like fills or to stroke colors. You can apply them to numbers like widths or auto layout gap, text strings to change localization, etc. Variables are smarter than styles in that they can change contexts based on a mode, which we'll get into a little bit later. They're also used for creating dynamic prototypes. If you were able to join us for our prototyping AMA, we'll definitely share that link out today as well, where we talk a bit more about prototyping with variables. But if we think about just the core thing, and one thing I like to tell people, like just the core piece of variables, it's a single definition and it's made up of a name and a value. So if you work with design tokens in code, a variable is really kind of the same thing. It's a definition of a name and a value. And in Figma, they can be one of 4 different variable types. And we'll talk about these a little bit as well. You can do a color variable, a number variable, a string, or a Boolean for visibility.
Amazing. That's super helpful. Awesome. I'm going to go next to Shayna is one of our designers on variables. And I always think it's really exciting just to kind of get the background. We all kind of came in with variables once it was released or a little bit before it was released, but Shayna has a little bit more of a background for us. So I would love to hear about that on designing variables.
Yeah, variables has definitely been, I think, like the biggest thing I've ever worked on, and probably one of like the biggest things we've worked on at Figma and shipped too. And as you can all tell, it's kind of something that systemically like affects almost like everything in the editor. Like you can use them throughout all these different properties. You can use them throughout prototyping as well. And it's been a huge collaboration with a bunch of people here. A lot of like deep discussions of just figuring out like, what is the shape of the feature and the product we want to ship. And so like early on, we had a lot of discussions thinking about design systems use cases of wanting to like publish out these stable values, colors, dimensions for your like entire team to use. And then also thinking about prototyping use cases of wanting to have these reusable values that maybe can change as you interact with a prototype, and decided that by creating like a more generable, flexible solution, it could be super, super powerful and enable you to create a bunch of different things in Figma. And so for like our config launch, we kind of launched with what we felt like was a good base for getting started in both design systems and prototyping use cases. And we're definitely still working on it. We had a launch last week, as some of you probably know, around like stroke width and more fields. And so it's definitely like a continual project of thinking through each place we want to support variables and like doing all the thinking of like, how does that affect the rest of Figma? How do we build it in a way that's like scalable and makes sense? And overall, it's been like really challenging and really fun. I think it's a pretty good example of what designing at Figma is like, where like people can kind of do anything in Figma. So you have to consider a lot of cases, it's a lot of systems design, and just trying to be very thorough and detailed in how we think through the product and make our decisions and build it out. So the hope is that like as we continue working on it, we're going to continue to ship features for all of you. But we want to make sure we like take the time you really need to really bake it and have it work best for you.
Awesome. That's super, super helpful to understand a little bit more on the background in it. Cool. So going into now, we kind of know like what's a variable, where it's coming from, the ideas behind it. How do I set up a variable and how do I apply it? Louis, we're going to go over to you for this one.
Yes, indeed. I will quickly run you through basically where you can find them, and then I'm going to apply them to this slide that we're looking at right here as another way to do Figma in Figma in Figma in Figma. So before I do that though, I just wanted to show you my favorite shortcut of all time is Command and full stop or Command and period to pull back the panels of Figma. Whenever I'm showing anything to anybody, I always just hide these panels. And if you're wanting to do that yourself, you can access the quick actions in the top left of your file. And you see I have this one saved in memory. So there's another shortcut here, backslash and Command or Control if you're on Windows. And that allows you to hide those panels if you want to show more of the interface. But I need the interface to show you variables. And variables live in the top right section of your file. This is in any Figma file. So regardless of whether it's a design file or a component library or a style file, they're going to be living in that top right section. And they're called local variables here. If I click the icon in the local variables section, you see we already got some loaded up in the file. And these are bucketed into a collection. And within this file, we have 4 collections available. We have a primitive size, a primitive color, a semantic size, and a semantic color. We'll come back to these naming conventions shortly, but effectively, you can create all these collections of variables inside your design files. Within here, though, I'm going to create a new collection for this example. And to do that, I can click the little menu here. By the way, Chad, what would you call this menu icon?
Oh, that one, it could be a kebab. It could be a triple dot menu. It could be a meatball sandwich.
Couple of falafels.
It's all food related, no matter what.
I'm going to create a collection here, and I'm going to call this a slide colors. And this can be called whatever you want, whatever semantically makes sense to you. And for this example, I'm going to be designing a slide. So I'm going to keep it called slide colors. And I'm going to create a variable in here, color. I'm going to call this slide background and sample this. And I'm pretty sure this is white. So I'm going to keep that as this. Another variable for slide text. And I'm going to sample the text on the slide too, and just zoom in to sample this. And then we're going to need this accent color on here. So I'm going to create another color for slide accent and then sample this purple here. What I can now do is select each element on the canvas, go to my fill settings and find by searching my slide, so slide text, select the shape itself, go to my fill slide background, it's underneath the panel here, and select the accent on the right-hand side, the fill settings, and search for slide accent. Nothing has changed because the values are exactly the same. However, what we can now look at is these modes in here. So I've got this value at the top with my hex values. I'm just going to call this light and then create another mode for dark. I'm now going to basically flip the colors over. So for the slide background, I'm going to make it this dark gray. For the slide text, I'll make it this light gray, just off-white. And for the slide accent, I'm going to make that just slightly darker and just see what happens. Now, if I close my variables panel, another little shortcut is if you double click the top, it makes it full screen. So if you've got a large set of collection of variables, that allows you to see them all much easier. I can now select my slide. And in the layers panel on the right-hand side, we have a new icon for the variables. I can pop this open, see my slide colors, see light and dark, and that will flip over my light and dark colors that I just created. So that's how you very quickly create a collection, create some variables, apply them, and do a mode switch.
Amazing. I'm gonna go to Shayna next. This one's coming a couple of times in the chat, or sorry, in the Q&A. And I know one that came in a lot with the social, and just really helpful one to know. What is scoping and why is it important?
Yeah, so scoping is kind of like an additional feature we've given you with variables. And I can also do a little demo here. But basically, when you define your variables for certain types like numbers and colors, we have some additional options that you can access behind this edit icon. And you can also access this on right click if you select a variable and click edit. And so for numbers, we kind of let you decide where you want this number to show up. So in here, someone's already decided like this number should only show up in width and height because it's related to sizing. But then you could define certain variables that are just for stroke and determine how wide your stroke is, or just for effects or layer opacity. And so that means that in all these other fields, like if you go and try to apply something like corner radius, you wouldn't see this variable in the picker. Kind of just keeps things cleaner for you and the rest of your team. And another example is like for colors. Like if I look at some of these that Louis already created, I can edit one of these. And right now this is going to show up kind of everywhere we support colors with variables today. But you could decide like maybe this color is only for backgrounds like this one, because it's named slide background. And you would decide like, I don't want this to show up in the stroke panel. I don't want this to show up for effects, but it should show up for the fills for frames and shapes. And then maybe not text. Maybe you have different variables that are named just for text. And so that lets you kind of clean things up for everybody who will be using these.
Awesome. That one, when I found that one out, I was very excited about that because I feel like it's really great as a user to have things scoped for you so you can know like, okay, I'm not even supposed to be using something somewhere. You don't have to worry about that. And that right clicking to find it is really key too. Awesome. Okay. Keep it on going. We're going rapid fire. There's so many coming in. This one's going to Chad. Can you define what a primitive and what a semantic are? I know that is we talk about those a lot when we're talking about variables, but I know a lot of people might not be familiar with that. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Yeah, let's see. A good way to think about it is a primitive. It's kind of your first layer. And if you're familiar with code, I like to say a primitive value, it's kind of like a div. It's just kind of random. It's not very specific. It can be used anywhere. A primitive is where you would typically define things in naming, like maybe like a blue 100 or a green 300. They're just very generic names that it's a green of a certain value or a certain step here in your color ramp. When we get into semantic, that's going to be more descriptive naming. And so that might be, again, if you're working in code, like, oh, this is a section or this is an aside. In naming here, we would say, hey, maybe instead of filling that slide with a mono 100, we might want to actually use a more semantic naming for that, like a background default or maybe a background subtle. Semantic values are typically what you're going to want to be applying in your designs. So if in your design system library, you are publishing out those colors, you're typically going to publish out your semantic collection. And those are what you're going to use to apply to your components, to apply in your designs. And most of the time, your semantics are going to be an alias of your primitive values. So as we can see here, we map back to that mono 100. That's our background default. The reason we do this is because we can reuse those in multiple different places.
Nice. This took another thing that was like, oh, this is something that is not necessarily only related to like Figma variables, and it's kind of a background that you need to know as well when you're getting into these. So that's super helpful to understand. Next to Shayna of an alias, kind of related to those semantic and primitives. And we might use an alias with that, or even without that. Can you talk us through what is an alias and where should they be used?
Yeah, Chad's example was great. An alias is basically a variable that equals another variable. And you do that when you might want to build like a little chain of kind of your colors so that if you want to change like your brand background color, it might be defined as like blue 100, which is like an atomic color variable. And then you might just switch it to be like green 100 instead. And that way, like, you can kind of go in and control things at different levels of your design system. So we find that it's pretty common to want to define like a semantic color and have it equal another variable that's like an atomic color that's just like named blue or green.
Mm-hmm. And I found too that when I was working a lot with developers, that was the way that they were working. So it would just kind of help us be a little bit more aligned with the code, so that we were, again, like speaking the same language, which is always helpful. Awesome. Okay. Continuing rapid fire. Going over to Louis on now that we've got kind of these semantics, we have our primitives, we have maybe some other different things. How would you suggest organizing these collections? And maybe just a quick recap on what a collection is versus a mode, because we don't want to confuse those two.
Yeah, the short answer is, can I speak for 3 hours on this topic because it's very complex?
No, you have 2 minutes.
The medium answer is, let's give it a go. Just to reiterate what a collection is, I open up my variables panel again, a collection is effectively a group of variables. So we have now 5 collections in this file, but the astute in the audience would probably question whether we want all these in the same place. The answer is probably no. If you're building out a sophisticated design system, you probably want to split your primitives and your semantics into different files. And there's no reason why you don't have them in the same place. Totally fine. You'll notice on these collections, the primitive ones have this full stop or period at the start of the name. That means that it doesn't get published to any other people when they're using it as a library. This is like a big check to, let's keep these mono colors, the grays, the yellows, the reds, locked away inside our design system. That's the target that we want. Additionally, you might right-click, edit, and de-scope all of these colors to make them not available when they're used inside your design files. That's like a double check, check. Full stop at the front of the name, de-scope those variables to make the primitives not available. But to be extra safe and extra secure, I would recommend splitting your collections into different files, because the way that I look at variables is that they're effectively like a data feed. And you want to plug all these data feeds into your designs in different scoped, small, nimble ways. And the reason why we might want to break them up again is because it allows us to do releases on individual collections or files in a much easier way. Let's say that you did need to increase the amount of primitives or increase the amount of semantic variables that you want to support in your system. Splitting them in their own file means you can just release that single collection or that single file effectively of that intention. More practically, I would look at it probably similar to this, in that I would have a bunch of different collections for the intention of those variables. And when we say intention, we're splitting them basically into primitives and semantics. There might be a component layer down there, but we're not going to talk about that today because it's totally optional and most systems don't need a component level token or variable. So I'd look at having effectively primitive collection for colors, primitive collection for semantic colors, semantic collection for colors, primitive collection for sizes, semantic collection for sizes as well, which then all get kind of pushed in from an optional point of view. So semantic color, arrow down into my design file. Semantic size, arrow down into my design file. We're not turning on those primitives into our design files because we only want the purposeful, intentional variables to be used inside our designs. As you can probably imagine, this is an endless task if we think about the things that we now need to support. If we now need to support effects, corner radius, radii, grids, strokes, these would all need to be supported as variables. However, they could still be supported or pushed from primitives into semantics. So regardless of where they get bucketed in a semantic level, we're still splitting up those primitives and those semantics.
Awesome. Sweet. That's super helpful. Okay, we've got collections now. This one has been coming in a ton in the Q&A and was one of our top social questions. So I'm going to go to Chad for this one. What is the difference between a variable and a style? Can you break that down for us and even kind of like when you would use which one?
Yeah. So we talked a little bit at the beginning, just when we think about what is a variable. And if we remember, I said a variable is a single definition, where a style can consist of multiple definitions. Similar to, again, I'll throw the code side out there. If you are working with design tokens, maybe you're familiar with a composite token that is made up of multiple values. A style, I like to think of a style kind of like a composite when I think about the differences between a variable and a style. What I mean by that, let's switch over into this file here. And if we look at this, our icons here, and we select them, we can see we have a style applied to this right now. We have this shadow 200 applied. And if we look at it, it has, it's just a shadow on there. And if I detach this, and we see, it's just our regular style. But what we could do is, let's say we want to make a style consisting of variables. So we can go here and let's just say our offset here. I'm going to apply this. Let's use, looks like I might not have any variables in here. So let's just make it back over in this file here as an example. Let's draw a rectangle and let's give this a style, which we have a brand purple. And remember, styles show up as a circle over in the design panel there, whereas a variable, if I duplicate this and we change it to a variable, it's going to be the rectangle on there. Now, let's create a frame here real quick, and I'm going to fill this frame with our background default. And so here we have our rectangle with our style on there. And, you know, we have our background on our fill. If I go to change this here, we notice that the variable, it's smart. It knows it can swap. It has a different definition, but the style itself doesn't change. However, if we were to change our style to be a variable, let's do our brand secondary, that will also switch. Now, let's say we want to add more to that style, though. So I'm going to go back to our style. And let's look at our brand purple here. So here in a style, it's just defined. We could also put in here a variable. So we'll put in our brand secondary, but I can also add more to it. So maybe I also want to put in, you know, another just kind of raw color in there. Or maybe I do want to do this for effects. You know, I want to add some effects here to it on this drop shadow. Let's put this size of 8. Let's put our size of 12. Let's put in here another variable. Let's do this one with just slide text. And then I can save this as a style. And so we could say this style, so this is now a composite, if you will. So we'll just say this is shadow. Great naming. It's not semantic, it's not primitive, it's just a name, for example, right here. But we now have a style consisting of multiple variables within it.
Just to piggyback on top of this, there is now a decision that you probably want to make in your systems team of where does the semantic live if we're thinking about styles and variables as composites. If we think of a bunch of variables being grouped together in this composite style, if we split up the implementation of maybe a color semantic, which might be BG subtle on your designs, then we think about a shadow, which might be elevation strong. That might just live in the style name, whereas in the color, that lives in the variable name. So there is a distinction that we need to be making when we're creating these variables for where does our semantic live? Is it in the variable or is it in the style? Because you can ultimately end up in maybe a problematic situation where you're duplicating your semantics. And that's going to maybe make even more confusion in the team.
That's super helpful. And can you just say again, the composite, that the definition of that was honestly something I learned this morning right from Louis. And I saw that coming in. So just folks who aren't aware of it, that's just the combination of a multiple styles.
Yeah, so you would create your variables for size, for color, and then inside a style, you'd pull them together and you'd group them inside a style. That therefore becomes what we call a composite token, composite variable, because you're effectively building a composition of multiple things in one style.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Super, super helpful.
I've also, I just saw somebody write, this is a steep learning curve. It definitely is. This is takes a while to get to grips with these things. So don't rush, don't feel like you're behind. It will take time, but you'll eventually get there.
Yeah, 100%. Awesome. Sticking with you, Louis, on approaching corner radiuses and effects. There's a couple in the chat on that. This was a big question we've been getting asked. Can you go over this for us?
Yeah. So just piggybacking again off what Chad showed us, the effects is effectively where we're building that composite variable, where we're grouping things together. And I've got this card component here where we can go and do basically the same thing. Select my card or cards, and I might want to add an effect to these and use variables within these. So currently There's nothing applied here. But when I hover over each individual point in here, you'll see the variable icon pulling up. If you hold Shift and click, that will open the variable picker. And now I can apply some sizes to here. So I might want the size to be something like size 8. You can see that has now been added. We've got this 8 coming out from the side. For X, I'm going to do size. Let's go 16. Let's go wild. And then for the blur, we're going to go for size 64. You can see that now blurring out as we start to see that shadow. And lastly, for the color, this can also be driven by a library variable. What we probably want to think about here, though, is baking in some opacity. There's a likelihood we don't want a full black or a full color for our shadow, because then we just get a really aggressive shadow in the background. So what I then start to think about is how can I introduce this kind of concept of opacity in my variables and in my now effects or shadows. That's when I'd open up the variable panel. I'm going to jump over to my primitive color collection. Again, this is where we have the colors basically defined or named how they look. So I'm going to create a new one, color, and I'm going to create this variable, and it's going to be mono, and we've got what we've got here, mono 400. Oops, mono 400. I'm just going to add 50 at the end, add a hyphen and 50. And that to me is going to be this hex value, but I'm going to set the opacity to be 50%, this number here. So I've now got mono 400, which is this value, matching the hex value, but setting it at 50%. And what I can now do is select my effects and see my primitive mono 450 pulling in. That has now offered me a much softer shadow. I'm just going to pull an instance out so you can see here. It's a much softer shadow. And now I've got these done. I can create a style or a composite of these now. So sorry, if I click the little picker, click the plus, and I've now got effect/shallow, something like that. Create my style, and I've now got all the variables bucketed into that effect. Not too dissimilar, but still quite different, is corner radius. So if I select my component again, or in this case, the instance, you'll see in our border radius properties, when I hover over that input field, we do get a variable icon, but this is telling me that it's mixed. So I probably want to open up the independent corners panel and show that we have 24, 8, 24, 8. These can also be individually driven by variables. You can see the variable icon appearing when I hover on that field. Again, hold Shift and click, and it pops open the variable panel. And I can now apply my size 24, size 8, size 8, and size 24. These naming conventions might be different from you. You might have something like, if I scroll down, you can see we've got radius property. So I might actually add my heavy radius, which is way more semantic. I don't necessarily need to know what the value of that is. So I can now drop in my heavy, and the value still pops up of 24. I can show my primary radius, which in this case is 8. Same for this one. And the last, we're going to go for, actually, we're going to go radius rounded, which is 9999. And that gives us this really beautiful, fully rounded edge. So you can see how we're going to pull in those semantic sizes to allow us to implement corner radius variables like so. The difference between this one and the one we just showed with the effect is that these are now not going to be stored as a style, which is why it's important to split out the primitive and the semantic variation of our corner radius variables. So in this case, having a radius group inside my semantic size collection actually makes sense. And let me just show you what that looks like. I'm going to pop open my panel, head over to my semantic size collection, and you'll see down the left-hand side, we've got all these groups for the different types of variables that we have in this semantic collection. I'll jump down to radius. You can now see I've got my semantically named radius variables set up, which, as Shana mentioned earlier, alias in that primitive value from our primitive size collection.
Awesome. That's really helpful. There's so many things in here that I'm just even taking in myself that are really, really great. I'm gonna go to Chad next for another one that has, this one is more recent, and we got this question a lot. I personally have this question. Chad, what is nested instance variant binding other than a mouthful to say? Tell us what that is and what it means and how it can be helpful.
Yeah, so we've affectionately started calling this NIV, yeah, here at Figma. So what is NIV? This is something that I also was like, oh, if only I could do this. And talking with so many folks, they've also said, wow, I wish I could do this. And in short, what it is, if you are nesting an instance of a component within another component, and maybe within another, you want to be able to apply variables to those nested instances, where you can switch modes, modes, switch variants. I'm all in variable mode right now. How is that today? So let's take a look at what this actually means in practice. So here, we have Good Morning Lauren in our downtime app here. And if we take a look at some of the text here, we've bound this text to our scene variable. So at the page level here, let's actually go set this up for our scenes at the page level here. We're working in the morning here. Maybe where you're at, it's afternoon. Okay, here we go. I am overriding. So there we go. So afternoon, and maybe it's evening. So we can see that it's changing. We're seeing it at the page level here. But if we take a look at our hero component here, we have a button nested inside of there. We also have this backdrop in there. And our backdrop has different variants on there, which are also afternoon, evening. Now, before last week's update, we would have to go change this manually. We wouldn't be able to bind this nested instance to our variable. And in an ideal world, we want our scene to change. So when our time of day changes from morning to afternoon or evening, we want to change that backdrop as well. So we can do that now by selecting an instance nested within this other instance of our component, and we can apply a variable to it. So I'm going to apply the same scene text string. So that way now it's going to change my variant since they're named the same thing as this text. So if I go to afternoon, it's going to change that variant. Same thing with evening. So it's going to change those. This is helpful for if you are going to set up your design in your file, maybe build a prototype. You can also apply this at the component level as well. So if we jump over to the component, the way that we made this work is by looking at our backdrop component set here. We can see that each of the variants in the set are named the same as the scene. So morning, afternoon, evening for the names. And then that's the same thing we have set on the component here. If we take a look at our variables, it's just set up in our scene collection using different modes, what we want it to say across each of those. So nested instance variant binding allows you to have that set. So whatever your variant name is, you can specify that as a text string within each mode and have it automatically swap your variants for you.
Awesome. That is great. I remember wanting to do this when Variance came out, and I was like, wait, we can't quite yet. So it's huge that this is what it is, and this is what it can do for us. Awesome. Louis, going over to you, there was a couple questions in the chat, and I know this is kind of like a deep question. I tried to answer it myself on a YouTube video, and the video it was impossible to make it less than 15 minutes. So it's a heavy question, but I'm wondering if there's any way to kind of make a summary of variance versus variables. When should you use which one?
I will try to do this in a short amount of time as possible. Let's say that we have an input component, and I'm just going to ungroup this here. We have an input component, and there's probably a likelihood that in this input component, you need to have it in a few different sizes. So for example, you might have a regular size, you might have, let's just make this a bit smaller, a smaller version like this. Very subtle difference, but there's a likelihood in your design system you have a couple of different density options of your component for this, in this instance, an input to be used. That focus ring broke, but you get the idea. Then there's a likelihood as well that you're probably going to have pre-variables, all of these in a dark mode version. You might have a high contrast version, a light mode version, 3 different densities, all in one big mega component set like this. These are variants, and you can create and use the variants and do the combinations and make them as complex as possible. I once saw a variant set with over 1,000 variants in it, and that is a lot. So you can make these very complex. And before variables, this is kind of what you had to do. Different densities, different modes, or different themes in the same variant set. The difference between that and what a variable can offer effectively is that the variable is the value that powers all of this. So the variable, if I pull back my panels here, the variable is the space between, it is the padding on the outside, it is the color, the border radius, the text color, all that sort of stuff, instead of it actually being the definition of the variation. What it does allow, though, is it allows you to basically remove all of these other things. So all that light mode, dark mode, different densities in your component set can now be handled exactly with variables. So if we take an example of this one here, where we've got that input field on the inside, and like before, it's got that 8 for the space between, it's got 16 on the horizontal padding, which is in this instance called padding spacious. If I open up my variables panel, head down to my padding, you can see we've got those variables again for our padding. We've got a mode in here called standard. This could be default, it could be base, it could be compact, it could be something else. If I create a new mode, and I call this spacious, down in that spacious variable value, I'm going to change the alias from a size 16 to size 28. If I now select my component and change the mode from the layers property panel again, let me just select the inside here. I'm just going to re-add this in. Let's go to our spacious. And I can now see that semantic size pops up as an option. I can change it from my standard to my spacious. No change inside because there's no content in there. If I now make that content visible, I'm just going to detach this here and pull this out actually, just so we can see the example. So you can see the space between is now 28. And before, on that standard mode, the space is 16. So those densities have been reduced. Additionally, we can do the light and dark mode switch between here. You can't see the difference because the label is light, but all of these different variations, in this case in variance, has now been removed from our system and replaced with just a single consolidated component set being fed by the variables. This is where the modes become really powerful. So these modes in your size and in your color are going to be powering all of this and reducing the complexity of a previously humongous variant set.
That's a lot. That's amazing. Excellent. There's so much to this. It's such like a heavy thing to try and break down, but this is really, really helpful. Awesome.
Yeah, just to follow up on like a clear, maybe a clean definition of what a variant can be used for. Variant is for the states, the variables feed all the values that live inside of it.
Mm-hmm. And probably at least 3 times in every call that I do, I say the wrong one, variant or variable. So it's very, very confusing as to like which one. We understand why it's so confusing as to like which one you should use. Awesome. Okay. Going to Chad. This one, there was a question that came in about like, I wish I could kind of apply or even just bring in my components at a certain mode. And I was thinking applying the modes at a page level might be helpful, but I'm not sure that everybody knows how to do that. Can you just show folks how you would apply a mode at a page level?
Yeah. So I was actually kind of doing that even in our app design example here. And there are multiple places that you can apply your modes. Admittedly, that's what got me. I had applied it further down in the chain at the layer level because that's what I'm accustomed to doing. But you can change it at the top level as well. So I'm going to set all this back to default here, just so that way we have it. And I'm going to select off. Let's go in here. So let's actually take a look at how we apply those at the different levels. So let's actually just do a whole new page here. So I've got this page right here. And if I switch over to the assets panel here, and let's just bring in a component. So I'll bring in that same hero we were working with before. Now it's going to come in at its default, and its default, again, here it's morning. And the reason it's the default is it's because it's the first mode that is in our collection here. If you're using variables, it's always going to default to whatever your first mode is. So here it's in our light mode by default. Any measurements, it only has one mode on our measurements. But with our scenes, we have the 3 modes. It's always going to be morning. It's always going to be light mode by default. Now, maybe we don't want that though. We are going to say, let's say we're working in evening mode and we want to make it so everything we bring in is already adapting to that. We could set our page with nothing selected over in our design panel here, where we would normally set our background for the page. Let's make that a little darker there. Let's just make that 0, 0, 0. We have our variables icon right here. So we could change the mode for the page here. And so maybe I want it to be dark mode by default. And I want that instead of being that default of morning, I want it to be evening at the page level. So now if I drag this hero out, well, it should apply that to there, but I'm not entirely sure why it did not apply that for me. But I can switch it also at the layer level there as well. Switch it to the evening, switch that right there. And we'll also check our component here and our backdrop. Our backdrop is not set to our scene. That would be why. So backdrop is set, our text is set there. So we have that where now it should. Our backdrop and our hero. There we go. So our hero is all set up now.
Amazing. Yeah, that's super helpful. And as I feel like that it's great to see kind of troubleshooting live, just because it's showing us like variables is a lot of stuff. It takes a minute to troubleshoot too. And it's like, once you kind of put the time into thinking about a little bit more, the answers can start to come to you for sure. So don't be concerned if it's not working immediately. Definitely take the minute to think about it and figure out what's kind of going on here. Awesome. That's
and I think just to add to that as well, because Lauren, that's a great point. I mentioned you can apply it at the page level. You can also apply it at the layer level. You can apply it at the object level. So sometimes you may have applied it higher up and not realized it, or while you were designing, you may have already applied it a bit lower down. You may have detached it as you were doing explorations. So yes, it can take some time. One thing I want to show you though, where it is helpful, let's say we are applying it at our layer level, or maybe here, let's just do it right at this hero level right here. I might change that scene to evening. I'm going to zoom in even a little further here. If we look in the layers panel, if there is a mode applied that's outside of the default, it will show you in your layer panel. So if you are setting that page level, if you have something set lower down on the layer level or object level, that's going to override the page level. So it's kind of like CSS, where the further down it is, it's going to override what's up above it. So if you're ever seeing, you're saying the page level is not changing, you can look at your layer panel and look at your layer list, and you can just kind of cruise through there and see if you already have a mode applied at a lower level. And then, so if I set the page here, let's set to afternoon. So we can see that, oh, I have evening here. I can go and I can set that back to auto. And now it's getting that from the page level.
That's super helpful. I don't even that is something that I need to remember to check on too, because that, yeah, it's definitely the overrides that'll get you. Awesome. That's really great. Thank you, Chad. Cool. We'll go to Louis. A lot of questions came in about naming. Do you have, and I know this is probably going to go to our classic "it depends" answer, but do you have any suggestions maybe for folks starting out about just some helpful naming tips when you're getting started with these variables?
Yeah, what does your company do? How many products do you support? Do you have light and dark mode? Do you support multiple platforms, breakpoints? All these questions are kind of how you'd maybe come to a resolution. But I think they're essentially things that every single system would have. And that is probably breaking things down by the implementation or the type of variable that you would need. We've spoken a lot already about the naming of primitive and semantic. And I think just separating these concepts out first is going to be the easiest way to diverge in a direction of what do we need for this group? What do we need for this group? The way I look at it is, as we've said a bunch of times today, the primitives basically being what they look like. And you probably don't have a need for 9 variations of every single color, but sometimes it can be useful to allow that flexibility within the visual polish of your design. So set up your base palette, which in this case is mono, red, pink, orange, yellow, etc., and then create variations of those colors. Once you've got these primitives set up, you can now start to build, even retrospectively, onto your existing system, that semantic layer. And within that semantic layer, there's basically 4 applications. You have the background, the border, the icon, and the text. And with those 4 sort of jumping off points, you can start to figure out what naming conventions or what names you might need. And the way that I would typically do that is looking at your existing components. So if you have a bunch of components in your system, go through all of them and just see what the common values are. So if we look at, for example, the input fields again, we might have this like grayish border on this one. On the checkbox, it's actually like a black border. On the radio, that's also a black border. So maybe these are shared values, a certain border type that you might be able to add. That might be like a strong border, in which case that indicates to me we could probably create border strong in our system. Additionally, looking back over here on the select element, that border is a light gray. That kind of matches what we had on the input field before. That might therefore take our border default. So these are the ways that we can kind of bring together these different components but shared values to try and figure out what a naming convention might be. For those 4 types, the way that I've looked at this before is that there's effectively fixed implementations of all of our variables anyway. We're going to have like a background level. We're going to have like a page. And this could be called page. It could be called default. It could be called base. But you need something that is the background of your website or the background of your app. You're going to need something for all the different sections or containers or divs or asides, if you're aligning to HTML terminology in your app or your website. In this case, that is called background body. Then there's sort of a bunch of different variations of this, depending on basically how many different levels of gray you need in your system. There's a high chance that you have lots of different grays in your system, and that might be subtle, strong, inactive, primary, secondary, tertiary. But effectively, you want to make it as obvious as possible to the designers using them where it should be used. If I'm building something that is, let's say we have a very nice website and the sidebar is like this gray and the main content might be like this. These are different gradations of gray, and they might tell me what the order or the focus should be on this. So the middle one might be the primary one. This one might be the secondary one. However, if the background becomes gray, then you can see you've kind of got a different problem where your colors might change. That shouldn't necessarily impact what you name them. This would still be the background for the page. This would still be either the primary or the default color for your app. This would probably still be the secondary one. So applying it to a bunch of different components in your system should allow you to see those different circumstances that are being applied. You're definitely going to need some sort of brand color that you have, or brand style or size or something like that you can apply. Actions, these are generally grouped between like buttons and links and those kind of things. Error states, success states, and warning states. Across all the different 4 types, background, text, border, and icon, you're likely to have very similar naming conventions across all of these. So in a couple of minutes, hopefully that helped you there.
Awesome. And a lot of people are asking, like, think this file is really great. And Louis, I know you have a lot of community files, which kind of leads us into our last question. Even though there are still 170 open questions, there are so many questions, we could do this for like days, but alas, we only have an hour. Just want to go a rapid fire through Louis, Shayna, and Chad. Tell us if, like, do you have a favorite community file, a resource, anything that, and Louis, I'll just follow you as you're sharing, anything that you find really helpful that can be helpful for the community.
Yes, this link here on the Figma canvas should take you to this collection in the community. And today I've added 3 files to that collection: a migration flowchart, a variable starter kit, which has a ton of different variables in there already set up, and a mapping and structure guide as well. So they should hopefully help you get started.
Amazing. Shayna, I know you have a really fun little last minute community file. Can you share that with us?
Yeah, I wanted to share kind of something that's like a little more fun and a little less systemsy, but I have a community file for something that's kind of more illustrative or like a brand marketing asset, where you can use variables to kind of create different visual iterations of something. So for example, I can kind of switch this between day to night, the stroke width changes, the colors change, and I'm kind of doing this using some components. And then I also hooked it up to prototyping. So these do like twinkle a bit because I have some interactions set up here as well. So this is like available to duplicate if people want to check this out in the community here.
That's super fun. And I love to just going through other people's files is a really helpful way to just kind of see how they've set things up, which is great. Chad, our last one, any fun community files or anything you want to share?
I was looking through the Q&A, and I think there were a lot of questions about even just kind of getting started. And obviously we know we've thrown a lot out there today, and there are so many questions. I always recommend, with any Figma features, check out our official playground files. They're a really, really great place to get started. I put the link to the variables one in the chat there, but this has been updated for even some of the new updates for working with effects or grids, or understanding a bit more about where you can apply variables, how they're applied. Just the playground file, it's a really great starting point for that foundational knowledge and walking through understanding everything about variables.
Awesome. Alrighty, we are at time. We have, just for any more resources for folks, youtube.com/Figma Design is one of my favorite resources. The community, that one's going to be amazing to see how other people, like I said, have set up their files. Folks like Louis, Chad, Shayna, all have community profiles too that have great resources, and figma.com/events. We've got a poll out right now if you want to hear from our sales team to get more information on variables, so just talk to our sales crew. Feel free to use that poll right there. And then Miggy, who is one of our amazing designer advocates, he works on the EDU team and is doing another variables live stream on Friday. This is going to be really great for beginner folks. Our EDU team does a lot of really great stuff for beginner folks, and Miggy's an amazing teacher. So if you want more variables info, check out that'll be on our events page. You can sign up right there. All right. Thank you, everybody, so much. We've had a lot of amazing panelists on all of these, a lot of huge help in the background. So thank you to everybody who's been in the background. Thank you to everybody who came to these AMA. And hopefully we answered some of your questions and will help you do a little bit, help your times in Figma be a little bit easier thanks to these, all these questions answered. All right. We will see you in the new year. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.